I'm gonna try to get a thumbnail. We just have to call that a day and hope it's good enough because there are too many books this month, I'm afraid. So, if you couldn't guess, today I'm gonna be talking about all the books I read in the month of August. August was a great reading month for me. I was finally home. I didn't have any traveling to do. I was able to just sit, relax, put my feet up, and get some good reading done. You're gonna have to pardon all the snuffling and noises. My pug has the zoomies, per usual. My 18-year-old is just laying next to me like an absolute angel. Couldn't ask for a better behaved young man. Emma not so much. But that's okay. We love our children equally. So this month I read a total of 19 books. I'm still in the middle of 2, so I finished a total of 17 and wound up only DNFing 2. So that's not too bad. I'm going to start with the DNFs. So my first DNF was Death in Her Hands by Tessa Moshfegh. This is one that I did wind up vlogging as I was reading, and I DNF'd about 25 to 40 pages in. We were spending a lot of time with the main character's dog Charlie, and I just had a gut feeling about where it was going, so I did Google I used the website doesthedogdie.com, and the dog does die, spoiler, and I decided not to finish it because I go a little bit more into it in the vlog that I was reading that book in, but I just am not the type of person that can really handle any kind of animal death or children's abuse or anything like that. Is a hard DNF for me, so I DNF'd it and didn't look back. And my second DNF was Atalanta by Jennifer Saint. This is an author I'm familiar with. I own her first 2 books. I really loved Ariadne and I did not like Electra, and I found myself with the same qualms with Atalanta. And I think going forward, I just am not going to pick up any more Jennifer Saint books if her niche is going to be retelling. So I was discussing this with my boyfriend, and I think I got down to the root of my issue with this author and something I've been coming across lately, which is I really liked Ariadne. I felt like it was well thought out in terms of a retelling. I felt like Jennifer Saint had a perspective and a story to tell. The likelihood that that would occur for 3 separate Greek retellings isn't high. So what I feel has happened is with the success of Ariadne, Jennifer Saint is now, not in a bad way, and absolutely there are people that love it, but it feels like there's less and less motive to create these retellings besides the success off of Ariadne, which leads me to feel like it's more just a capitalizing off of what the audience wants versus an actual yearning to tell a story. And that is what I have felt with each book I've read. So I wound up loaning this from the library rather than repurchasing, whereas after her first book, she was an auto-buy author for me. But the difference between how I felt from Ariadne to Electra was so vast that she came off of the auto-buy for me. And I would be interested, and I would pick up her writing if she ever ventured out of the mythology retelling. I think she would have a lot to offer in terms of fiction writers, but for now, I think when authors fall into a shtick rather than a niche, that is when I tend to debark the ship. But I also know people that love that. They love that they can pick up an author, they know essentially what it's going to be about, they know essentially what the story is going to revolve around. It's going to be a Greek retelling, it's going to have a feminist retelling lens to it. But for me, it just felt like there was nothing new going on, and I have felt that way for a couple of books now. So unfortunately, I think this will be my last Jennifer Saint. Okay, now we can go through some of the books that I read and really, really enjoyed. So for the month of August, I finished the Red Rising trilogy. I read Golden Sun, and I also read Iron Gold. This is book 1 in the second trilogy for Red Rising, and I gave Golden Sun 4 out of 5 stars, and I gave Iron Gold 4.5 out of 5 stars. I have a full review of the first Red Rising trilogy that you can go watch, and my thoughts are all there. I also read Morning Star as well. I basically read the whole trilogy in the month of August, I believe. Maybe I read Red Rising at the end of July. Next, I read Bloodmarked by Tracy Deonn. I rated this one a 2.5 out of 5 stars. I think I am definitely exiting my interest in YA. It makes sense. I'm 30, and even though people can read YA as they're older, I think I personally am starting to grow out of it. I did enjoy this for what it was, and it was angsty and it was fun. Unfortunately, I don't think I'll be continuing on with this series. But that being said, this was my favorite YA that I did read this month. You know what? I'm gonna change it. It'll be a 3 out of 5 star because the other ones I read are in the 2 range, and this was significantly better. So I'll say 3 out of 5. Next, I read Chain of Thorns by Cassandra Clare, and I rated this 2 out of 5 stars. This was the final book in the Last Hours trilogy, and I am kind of happy it's over, to be honest. I felt like this one was an absolute flop. I felt like the pacing was weird. We spent so much time, like, I would say the first 75% of this book, there's absolutely no action and nothing happens, and it's just a lot of characters sitting with their feelings and more miscommunications, and then maybe the last, and then 5% after that, we start to get a little movement, and maybe 20% of this absolute chonky book, we actually get some answers. But because we've spent 2 books building up, it felt so unsatisfactory. I know this is the last book right now. My dog. I know this is the last book right now for the Mortal Instruments series, so I think I'm happy to see her put it to bed, and I'll be interested to see what she does with adult fantasy. She has an adult fantasy coming out this fall, and I will pick it up, but probably from the library until I see what she's offering the adult genre. Next, I read Moby Dick by Herman Melville. Contrary to what I wanted to do at the beginning of the month, I actually wound up listening to this on audiobook while I was working. It was completely unintentional. I just saw it was available for free, so I was like, well, I'll just start it while I'm working. I work from home full time now, so it is nice to listen to music, read an audiobook, or listen to a podcast to kind of just keep the day moving while you do more monotonous tasks. So I popped on the audiobook thinking I would pick it back up, the physical copy, later on in the day, but I just wound up really enjoying the audiobook, and I just rode that wave for the entire month and really, really enjoyed my reread. Next, I started Middlemarch by George Eliot. This is essentially a classic that centers around provincial life and all that encompasses, and I'm having a really great time so far. It's a little too early for me to give my thoughts because it is such a massive book. I'm maybe 15% of the way through, so this will be a book that carries me through, I'm sure, a couple of months. But while we're on the road of classics, I also read North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. I think you will see the vlog of me reading it before this one comes out, and I really, really enjoyed everything about this story. This is going to be an auto recommendation for those that really liked Pride and Prejudice. I feel like it had a lot of the same themes, but maybe just different plot levels from what Pride and Prejudice does. Whereas Pride and Prejudice, I would definitely say the A plot is romance. I would say that a kind of hard look at society and the different class systems is more the A plot for this book, and the B plot would be romance. But there's enough of a romance that I was absolutely screaming. It was so cute, and I just love any time. So we're following Margaret and John Thornton as they fall in love, but John Thornton is a owner of a factory, and Margaret is recently new in town, doesn't really understand the dynamics of the town, and befriends a couple of factory workers, primarily the daughter and then her father, who is looking to unionize and get fair wages for his work. So she sees a very different perspective from John Thornton, but of course it is the man falls first and is very enraptured with her and her ideology, even if he doesn't agree with it all the time. and it was just a really great time. And those are the classics I read, and I'm actually really happy with 3 because I kind of fell off the classic bandwagon probably since winter, so it was about time I picked one up. Speaking of randomly picking up, having fallen off the bandwagon, next I read Dragon Reborn. This is book 3 in the Wheel of Time, and I will say I did enjoy this a lot more than book 1 and 2, but that being said, I still rated it 2.5 out of 5 stars. I think there is a lot to be left wanting with this series, and I will say again, maybe the last like 50 pages, I was sucked back in. I was intrigued because who you thought this big villain was isn't actually this big villain, which makes a lot more sense considering where the level of training all of our sort of fellowship has had together. But that being said, it is definitely a staple of its time. A lot of foundational tropes that we find the fantasy genre has just grown past are essential in here because of the time it was written, and it unfortunately doesn't age the best in my opinion if you're used to reading more modern fantasy. I feel like this can leave you wanting a little bit in terms of a fantasy. Plus, I find Rand to be the most irksome main character in the entire world. Literally anytime, there's barely any Rand in this book, and it was still too much. Like, I just cannot stand him. Next, I read Black Cake. This is one that's been on my TBR for quite a while. I've heard so much about it, and I'm very happy to report I wound up rating this 4.5 out of 5 stars. We're following a brother and sister as they are moving through their grief of having recently lost their mother, and we're following them as they listen to a set of audio tapes that their mother left behind post-mortem with her lawyer that kind of unravels the secrets that she's been keeping from her life, from her children, and it was just really amazing. It was so heart-wrenching. It was so beautiful. It fell just shy of a 5-star because there was a couple of things I was left wanting, but I also go into that in one of my reading vlogs. And the last physical book I read was Belladonna by Adeline Grace. I rated this one a 2.5 out of 5 stars. It was absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with it. We're following a young woman as she kind of evades death. We find out right away that death has tried to come for her a couple of times. Death is a personified being in this book, and he has tried to get our protagonist a couple of times, but she's always been able to evade him in the sense that he cannot lead her into the next world. The repercussions of that is those around her, her guardians, first being her mother, but then her preceding guardians to follow, cannot seem to stay alive and keep dying in the most mysterious circumstances. And I won't give too much away because there is a certain, like, it isn't like a romance fantasy, but there is a certain mystery surrounding everything. Okay, and now to go through a couple of the ebooks I read, because I did a lot of e-reading this month. First, I read Funny You Should Ask, and I rated that 3 out of 5 stars. It was absolutely fine. It's just a contemporary romance, and I really don't have much to say about it, to be honest. Next, I read The Rachel Incident by Carolyn Donahue, and I rated that 3 out of 5 stars. In that novel, we are following Rachel and her sort of band of friends. She has a gay roommate, James, and James is this sort of transformative person who's come into her life and really shaken things up for her. We follow maybe the first like 10% as we are introduced to James and this beautiful friendship and love that develops between them. We are also following this larger plot of James's boyfriend, who is a married man, and we are following a couple of decades over how that transpires and where Rachel falls into the mix of all of this. And right at the beginning of the story, we find out that Rachel is pregnant and from whom we don't know. I also read Trainwreck by Sadie Doyle. This was a nonfiction book that covered the idea of the train wreck woman that society loves to tear down, the woman that we kind of build up, this great celebrity. They give a lot of examples such as Britney Spears and Paris Hilton and Miley Cyrus, and basically how there's no winning for that woman. If they fight back, they're seen as difficult. If they stay silent, then they continue to just be berated by crazy people. But I rated this 3 out of 5 stars specifically because I had a few qualms. I believe it was written in 2013 or 2016, something like that. So it wasn't too old to not know that I feel like it didn't cover women of color or women in the queer community with any kind of realistic lens or differentiation that I felt was deserved. And that was a little bit disappointing to see. There's a couple of touches on Nicki Minaj, but literally I mean that in a passing way. Sadie Doyle also touches on Billie Holiday, looking at it through a lens of patriarchy and how society tears down women. I felt that it was very short-sighted and maybe didn't age the best. I agreed with everything that I was reading, but I felt like it could have gone 3 or 4 steps further if they wanted to give a good scope of how female celebrities are treated. I felt like within that same time frame they were looking at, there were so many great examples of Rihanna's the first one that comes to mind, who was basically America's darling, and when she decided to explore her sexuality in music and express herself, she was immediately torn down for that. I feel like they could have gone deeper with Nicki Minaj, but even some larger figures and some of the largest figures like Beyonce, there's so much to explore in their journey and how they have attempted to be deemed train wrecks but are now. Rihanna is literally a billionaire with multiple streams of income and successful fashion lines and beauty lines and music, and Beyonce is dominating with a world tour. I feel like if we were looking at the same era of time, there were opportunities to just be more diverse in the women that were being covered. So again, I agree with everything Sadie Doyle was talking about, but I felt like it was under one specific lens, and that was disappointing to see. So the other book I'm in the middle of is Foxglove King by Kristen Hanna. This is a repeat author that I have tried before. I DNF'd her second book, so I almost said Into the Woods. It was her Red Riding Hood retelling, but not really. I can't remember what it's called right now. But I read book 1 with my sister-in-law. Both of us did not like it. I was sent book 2 very kindly from Orbit to review, and it was unrequested. It's just sent to me in a fall package last year or the year before, and I didn't even give it a chance. I wasn't really interested in continuing the story, but I did pick up Foxglove King as an arc. That was sent to me very kindly, and I'm making my way through it, and I do really like it right now. So next I read Just My Type by Falon Ballard, and I rated that 2.5 out of 5 stars. I actually DNF'd it like 40 Kobo pages away from finishing the book, and that is how you know the story is not for you. And unfortunately, it was just something that I felt the dialogue was so cringy, if I'm gonna be honest. Like, it was trying, I feel like there has to be a small distinguisher between how you speak and how you write, and I feel like Falon Ballard did not distinguish it at all. So maybe she was saying things that you might hear your friends say, but when you're reading it, like, it just came across as so cringy, and it felt like something that I would hear like me and my friends say like maybe 7 or 8 years ago that I tried to block out and not think of us saying, and like there it is in writing, just a reminder of like how cringy we used to talk, and I just couldn't get away from it. And I couldn't bear, and literally it was on my e-reader. I read it in like 4.5 hours, and I couldn't push through that last little bit. It was all in a night, and I was just telling myself, like, just push through it. You're so close to the end, and I couldn't do it. The Hulk smash references, the kind of Taylor Swifty references, it was too much. It was too much for me, and I couldn't do it, and I'm so sorry. And I feel like that would be a great book for those coming out of YA entering adult romance, but I couldn't do it, and I'm so sorry. And it was a 2 out of 5 stars. And last, I will say I ended on a high note. I read The St. Ambrose School for Girls by Jessica Ward, and I am happy to report I thought this was a YA novel. I thought this was in the teen section, and then I was perusing the bookstore recently trying to get my hands on Divine Rivals, which I still cannot do. It's sold out everywhere, sold out online. So I'll get to that at some point this fall when I find it. But I was so pleasantly surprised to see St. Ambrose School for Girls was in the adult section, because I just rented it on my ebook from my library. I had no idea what I was getting into. I just knew this book had a lot of buzz, and I'm so happy to report this was one of the higher books I read, at a 4.5 out of 5 stars. This is, I'm not even sure if it would qualify as a thriller, but kind of. So essentially, we are following a young woman who suffers from bipolar disorder as she is placed in this specialty academic private school that is a live-in girls' school. She has a roommate that she does get along with, and she's happy that there's a loose connection there. But our protagonist suffers a lot from anxiety about the fact that she suffers from a mental illness. She doesn't want to tell anyone. She's scared of being judged. And of course, in this school, there is a local mean girl who's just on top of the world and just bullies people just to bully people. We find out that there might be a little more to it going on at home, but at the end of the day, she's just not a very nice person. And we have some mystery and questions surrounding this character. So there is a gentleman that all of the young girls refer to as Hot RA, who is one of the residential advisors in the girls' dormitory. And we see this popular girl having a couple of questionable run-ins with him that our protagonist just happens to see. We learn very early on that there is a hierarchy in this school that is not to be tampered with. I would say this is like a dark Mean Girls with a very loose thread of Bunny by Mona Awad running through it, and I absolutely loved it. It was so atmospheric. I'd say the first like 50% we are really just getting a deep dive into our protagonist's thoughts. We get to see her go through a manic episode, we get to see her go through a depressive episode, and all that that entails. So I would say that there should be some trigger warnings associated with this book, that there is talks of self-harm, there is talks of depression, and you do have to live in it for quite a little bit as a reader as our character works through it. So all of that should be noted, but I think it is handled in a really great way. It was compulsively readable. I just couldn't stop turning the pages, and I thought about it while I was at work. I found the characters were so lifelike, and their actions were so realistic to me, whereas I don't feel that's always the case in a thriller. So I really, really enjoyed my time with this novel, and I will definitely be recommending it. So that is going to be it for me today. So that is a total of 17 read, 2 I'm still in the middle of that I am having a great time with so far. So like I said, I'm very happy with what I was able to read this month. I can't believe I got through as many as I did, and I just feel like I have to continue that momentum. I was so concerned when I did my August TBR because I got so many big books, but honestly, with all the rainy days we've been having and the fact that I wasn't really traveling, I was able to just sit down and read. So that is going to be it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.